All right, here we go.
Yay, thank you.
Sure. All right. So, where we left off, there's a lot in this book that we're not going to cover. He writes quite a bit of this while he was still in jail, and he uses all kinds of analogies to um, describe that experience that are set in movies, most of which I've never watched. Um, so I'm going to go over a little bit more in this beginning, and then we're going to skip over to um, what he refers to as um, like part two, which is where all of the kind of in the book it's labeled as shell game part three, but that's where he actually starts naming names and talking about some of the gist of what was going on. So where we left off yesterday was that he had recognized the interagency connection between WikiLeaks cables and saw how General Dale Daly, who had been the commander of the JSOC, which is the unit at Fort Bragg, and charged with findings of international terrorist banking networks, had failed to utilize Birkenfeld's intelligence material. What was fascinating to him was General Daly had then been made Ambassador Daly, which again is something that we see routinely in Operation Gladio. And President um, Bush the second, coordinators for counterterrorism at the State Department, they had begun to analyze, discuss, construct political objectives around the UBS Switzerland terrorist financing implications Berkfeld had disclosed through various interagency State Department cables. JSOC commander, then after that guy left, was Stanley McChrystal. Also failed to track the UBS connection, even though they had the intelligence. These discussions occurred as the financial crisis was heating up in 2008 and suggested that Berkfeld's disclosure to Senator Carl Levin and Barack Obama's Senate subcommittee on investigations about the UBS terrorist finance leak and tax matters could be a threat to the global financial stability and therefore wouldn't be investigated. What was fascinating about this to the author was the fact that he had worked for Ambassador Daly at the State Department's counterterrorism office at the time as his liaison officer to US SOCOM. So I knew everything the State Department and US SOCOM was doing in this area, which amounted to nothing. The same was true of US Central Command in Tampa. Later, under President Obama, Hillary Clinton became Secretary of State and in 2009 agreed to have Birkenfeld made part of a political solution, which meant prosecuting and silencing him through the Attorney General, Eric Holder's office. This entailed having two Chinese Uyghurs held that had been being held at Guantanamo Bay relocated to Switzerland, as well as the U.S. being given preferential status on a Swiss financial treaty. In exchange, Switzerland's UBS was given deferred prosecution and a fine by Eric Holder and Lanny Breuer, Breuer, who UBS had a set of attorneys in the United States. And this is what one of the most nefarious parts of this. UBS hired Covington and Burling, the same law firm that was corrupt and had been hired by General Flynn based on a recommendation that some allege came from Stanley McChrystal, the guy we were just talking about. General Stanley McChrystal because General Flynn had done some business with him. Plus, he'd known him from his entire career in the Army. So Covington and Burling was Eric Holder's old law firm. So they were also representing UBS in the United States. That's going to become important as we go through this material. It's a round robin of protection. So Eric Holder, having come from Covington and Burling, they should have not even had any say in any of this when it came to the prosecution of their former company that they represented, UBS, but he did. There was also a forged letter sent to UBS, which was interpreted as an assassination attempt against Birkenfeld, that the DOJ and the CIA was involved in, as well as the CIA substation in the Embassy of Bern, which is Allen Dulles' old stomping grounds. Okay. Covert intelligence agencies were using UBS and other foreign banks' accounts, and Birkenfeld's revelations threatened their unchecked, unregulated, and likely illegal activity. This is where the story takes the most bizarre turn of all, and it should have immediately triggered a congressional investigation. Not that that would have done any good, as we found out. It was a fascinating coincidence that it appears that Edward Snowden, the Booz Allen Hamilton contractor at the NSA, who turned whistleblower and revealed to the British newspaper The Guardian various domestic surveillance programs used by the NSA on American citizens, also saw CIA operations in Switzerland involving Brad Birkenfeld, according to the article The Guardian wrote, which at the time, Glenn Greenwald was part of that set of reporters that wrote that article. Snowden describes a particularly formative and disheartening incident in which he claims CIA operatives attempted to recruit the Swiss banker to obtain secret banking information by getting him drunk, encouraging him to drive, and then arresting him for a DUI. This was meant to entrap the banker, to exploit him. And that paralleled exactly what they had done to Brad Birkenfeld. As a computer network security expert with diplomatic cover and security clearance, Snowden saw all of the intelligence reports, cables, and discussions involving the Swiss banking target, one of which was Birkenfeld, and no doubt became soured by the arrogance and a plot to betray Birkenfeld through a fraudulent letter sent to UBS, as well as the later false prosecution against him. Snowden would have seen this as not only contradicting the Constitution, but understanding there was no one in the government that he could trust, because he was afraid the same thing would happen to him. He'd be set up. And he's likely correct about that. So many intelligence agencies and departments were conspicuously missing or hiding from the Birkenfeld case. I wondered if counter-terrorist financing operations existed anywhere other than on paper. The agencies which should have taken the lead in examining Birkenfeld's material were nowhere to be seen and had never once communicated with him. Astoundingly, the Department of Treasury Office and their Terrorism and Financial Intelligence Unit, which the author had been working with when he was at CENTCOM in the State Department, had basically the ability to undercut the financing of terrorism worldwide and had never talked to Birkenfeld despite all of the material he had relating to the network. Also absent was the National Counterterrorism Center, which he had worked with from his perch at the State Department. The NCTC was the primary organization in the United States for integrating all intelligence pertaining to terrorism, including financial. Also missing was the Defense Intelligence Operation Coordination Center, which was the lead DoD intelligence organization responsible for military intelligence and national intelligence in support of the combatant commanders. Most striking was the absence of the Director of National Intelligence, the DNI, the very man who had been appointed to oversee the reorganization of the intelligence community and integrate their efforts to combat terrorism in the aftermath of 9/11. No interagency team of any military command had been informed about Birkenfeld, which the author blames on Senator Carl Levin and President Obama, whose Senate subcommittees and investigations had been the one to investigate Birkenfeld. Most offensive was that Senator Levin had also been on the Senate Armed Forces Committee and yet never reported any of the intelligence to the armed forces. It sickened the author, not because of incompetence, but he was beginning to see collusion. And the fact that it was leading to deaths on the battlefield was very disturbing. Despite the fact that Birkenfeld was a high-value individual to the military targeting process and could have yielded information about the hierarchical structure, vulnerabilities, and capabilities of terrorist finance networks that would have greatly empowered the U.S. SOCOM operations with fusion points of synchronization, intelligence, and long-range planning. All of this would have been life-saving. Information that Birkenfeld had and offered was kept locked behind the DOJ, the Senate, and Birkenfeld was put in jail. Booz Allen Hamilton was also to blame, for its counter-terrorist finance training PowerPoint presentation seemed to plagiarize much of Birkenfeld's material disclosed to the State Department in that we were later able to verify because of WikiLeaks exposing those cables, yet never identified him or UBS as the solution the military had contracted them to find. After months of talks, Birkenfeld and the author, while they were in jail, decided the information had to get out to the American people and that Congress was obligated to investigate it. Although we represented two different plots, when they were put together, it was an unbelievable story of corruption, cowardness, incompetence, and treason. The failure to utilize Birkenfeld's UBS terrorist finance intelligence was not only a major discovery, but an ongoing threat that negatively affected the war, our troops, and our allies, as well as domestically. So, just to make this clear, our taxpayer dollars was used to hire Booz Allen Hamilton to do a job. When they did their job so well, they took one of the employees that had stumbled across this UBS terrorist financing and put him in jail on trumped up charges. And the guy that was over in Switzerland that had also stumbled across this, yeah, he ends up in jail too. So he goes through all of these people that he contacted when he was in jail writing. So first of all, he files a whistleblower complaint. And basically, he hears nothing. Then he sends a letter to Marine General James Mattis, who at that time was the commander of U.S. Central Command, having replaced David Petraeus. He gets no response. He also sent a letter to John Custer III, who was the director of intelligence at CENTCOM. He gets no response. He sent letters to just about everybody in Congress. He gets no response. He sent letters to literally almost everybody. Let me give you a few of the names. General Martin Dempsey, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Ray O'Denaro, Chief of the Army, Inspector General Lynn Holbrooks of the Pentagon. Not a single answer. The only congressional member that even acknowledged his letter with a form letter was Rand Paul. And it wasn't addressing anything he said, it was just a form letter. So then he decides he's going to contact the media. And knowing that none of the Mockingbird media is going to respond to him, he sends his whole package of information to Fox News. He personally addressed it to Sean Hannity, Bill O'Reilly, Greta Van Susteren, S.E. Coop, Monica Crowley, Chris Wallace, Bill Kristol, who was both at Fox and the Weekly Standard, Fred Barnes, Charles Krauthammer, Brett Humes, Neil Cavuto, Mike Huckabee, Rush Limbaugh, and a few others. He literally heard nothing back from any of them. He also contacted CNN Jim Cafferty, Wall Street Journal's Roger Ailes, Rupert Murdoch, USA Today's Tom Vanderbrook, the New York Times, Michael Hastings, LA Times, Washington Post, The Hill, Roll Call, GQ Magazine, Vanity Fair, Rolling Stones. He has a list of them. That's the highlight. No response. None. Then he writes presidential candidate Mitt Romney and his VP nominee, Paul Ryan, the GOP Republican National Committee chair, Reince Priebus. Nothing. He mails this to Glenn Beck, Laura Ingraham, Dick Morris, that were on talk radio shows. No response. Then he tries the think tanks, Heritage Foundation, Family Research Council. Nothing. No response. At the Heritage Foundation, he personally addressed it to the president, Ed Fuellner, Jim DeMint, and James Carafano. At the Family Research Council, he sent separate packages to Tony Perkins, Peter Spriggs, and Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin, Army retired. No response. Nobody wanted to touch this story. And the rest of this area in the book just talks about him spending time in the library at the typewriter, writing out all of the information that he had, his thoughts about what was going on. And he was documenting while the other guy was there, all of the conversations that he had. So he would spend as much as 8 hours in there at a time at the typewriter trying to document all of it. So, quite a journey. No one wants to touch any of this. He talks about the original duties that he had at Booz Allen. And basically, they had been trying to create a psychological, so they were trying to profile radical extremists. They watched all of the gory decapitation videos and how these people and the recorded meetings of them talking to each other, um, trying to, because this guy's an expert in psychological operations, trying to get a footprint so that they could create basically a counter psyops against them. And he talks about, I mean, obviously we don't need to go into it in detail about how horrific that experience was, but there's no way to avoid it if that's what your job is and you're trying to come up with a strategy to counter it. You have to understand it if you're going to counter it. um, he also talks about the trying to contact um, people like Leon Panetta, who, was both the CIA director and the Secretary of Defense, which that should never happen. Um, no one should ever be in both of those jobs. So he then says that Birkenfeld was the proof that confirmed my research, suppositions, and predictions about the terrorist finance network that he had been working on all along. And he talks about the chair of the Senate Subcommittee on Investigations, which had Birkenfeld testify and examine his evidence, as well as the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, which should have shared the information with the military, and according to Birkenfeld, never did. Hillary Clinton at State Department and the coordinator for the counterterrorism, who he actually worked for, and Eric Holder at Justice, and the U.S. Assistant Attorneys, Kevin Downing and Kevin O'Connor, that had worked with the intelligence agencies, orchestrated an attempt and attempted foreign plot or perhaps murder against Birkenfeld through betraying his whistleblowing to UBS and a fraudulent letter pretending to have been written by Birkenfeld's Islamic banker friend, whose phone they had already tapped, but then falsely charged him with a non existent crime and imprisoned him after he escaped their assassination trap, and forbade him from ever speaking about this issue, and to this day, hanging the sword over his head in the form of threatening to. So he basically proved he was falsely imprisoned. He was awarded a $104 million settlement predicated on signing an NDA that he never talked about. So they silenced the one guy that could expose the terrorist financial links. And that was hung over his head forever. Okay. He goes on to talk about the let's see. Once they got through all of the investigation, Attorney General Lanny Brewer gave the proverbial slap on the wrist and deferred prosecution to UBS with a small fine. A foreign bank had secretly meddled with, influenced, and pressured U.S. politicians and government agencies to arrest and jail its own citizens for their patriotic whistleblowing to American people. In exchange for this service, UBS has guaranteed positions on the board with generous consulting payments to all of the people that were involved. Phil Graham, former Republican Texas senator, um, Attorney General Eric Holder, Assistant Attorney General Lanny Brewer, who Brewer went back to work for Covington and Burling and continued to represent UBS after all of this happened. Former Senator Barack Obama, who served on Carl Levin's Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, heard Berkfeld's original testimony before the committee and examined in great detail the evidence that he provided, indicating UBS, as HSBC, had been funding terrorism through their bank. He had bank statements provided by Abdullah Aziz, Azziz, who was identified as the key al-Qaeda financier by Osama bin Laden. That was documented in a Rolling Stone article as well by Matt Taibbi. There was a foundation that was used as a shell company called Optimus Foundation. They made contributions to Obama's presidential campaign, which came from UBS chairman of the Americas, Robert Wolf. Okay. Leon Panetta, while he was the Secretary of Defense, was involved in all of this, and then he gets a position at Booz Allen Hamilton, the company that basically squashed this guy. And just before this book went to print, a colleague of the authors from Booz Allen Hamilton's cyber warfare team assigned to the NSA had filed another whistleblower report about government's abuse of intelligence, its manipulation, and the information that would help preclude terrorist attacks in the United States was being withheld. This was shared with Glenn Greenwald at the Guardian newspaper, and will expose materials that I have been reporting to Congress. All right. So there's a couple of charts in here, and then we get to some very interesting material a few pages back. So just a little bit more about Bennett. He says, I'd been educated in the counterterrorism propaganda training and PSYOP schools of the International Military Intelligence Complex, and then quite accidentally discovered U.S. SOCOM's cover-up of Israeli top evidence surrounding 9/11. He also had identified Osama bin Laden's ties to the CIA. Worst of all was my discovery of the Navy SEALs and Special Forces soldiers murdered to hide some of the connections. And he doesn't specify which ones those were, but there's a lot of allegations out there that the shooting down of the one Chinook and all of that happened in Afghanistan that was affiliated with the team that went into eventually take out bin Laden, and that some of their prior missions had exposed them to some of this confidential information about the funding based on the discovery of different weapon systems that these people had, and that there were some of these special forces were targeted in the theater to make sure they never talked. He said, so he's released now. And soon after, the dam started to crack as he began requesting FOIA documents. He provided a deposition to Judicial Watch and was interviewed on multiple media programs. And then he gives a warning that says some of the material might traumatize people by reading it. Not our audience, because we've read about how awful these people are. He said, we first must re examine the past and start from the beginning if you're going to know the truth. He goes on to say, after using the typewriter, he found that his freedom and the ability to use a computer made his research a lot easier. I bet it did. He wasn't even allowed visitors when he was in prison, and he ended up serving 2.5 years. He said at the heart of his Venn diagram was a guy by the name of Dov Zakheim, Dovzakheim, and his son Roger Zakheim. To simplify these issues into a basic concept, Zakheim and Bennett were working through Booz Allen Hamilton and were contracted to work with the military to find, analyze, and stop terrorist financing in order to protect American lives and their property from destruction. That's how he understood his contract, his job. However, it seemed like when I discovered and reported all kinds of nefarious activity, things began to change. He provided analysis briefings all the way up the chain of command, to include some in the command center at the Pentagon. And various things started happening to him. He said that he had found Swiss bank accounts and their countries and owners, and WikiLeaks, State Department, and CIA cables provided by Brad Birkenfeld himself, the original Union Bank of Switzerland whistleblower who had appeared on 60 Minutes, Vanity Fair, Democracy Now!, and in most newspapers. It was the day that changed everything and raised the stakes of the game to treason in his book. He also learned that the law firm, Covington and Burling, had been contracted by none other than UBS and HSBC to hide the terrorist financing accounts, and that Booz Allen Hamilton and the Clinton Foundation, later headed by Donna Shalala, however you say her name, who was not only Clinton's Health and Human Services Secretary when Bill Clinton was president, but the lawyer this guy hired to defend him, she was his aunt. And he never knew that. Do you remember how I told you that they actually, in all of these court cases, they control both sides? There's just like what they did with General Flynn in recommending Covington and Burling be his attorney. They control both sides. They are going to screw you. So his lawyer that was recommended to him, aunt, was an employee of Bill Clinton's and Hillary Clinton's that he's trying to blow the whistle on. That's just crazy shit. Then he had another outrageous surprise when he discovered that Roger Zakheim and Dov Zakheim worked at the U.S. Armed Services Committee as an attorney when he was submitting his reports to Congress while he was in jail. Okay. So the guy at Booz Allen Hamilton that knew he was going to be trouble was on the armed uh, services committee getting his quote unquote whistleblower complaints. Not only did Roger Zakim allude or collude with his dad to hide these reports, um, he was also talking about Bennett to all of the other committees that he was sending the report to, basically saying he's a crazy guy. All right. But then they had the gall to secretly give all of his material to Covington and Burling, who represents UBS. And UBS, or excuse me, Covington and Burling gave him a job the month before Bennett was released from prison, this Zahim guy. So he goes to work for the company that basically was responsible for UBS putting the hit out on him. Also joining Roger Zakim at Covington and Burling was Homeland Security Secretary Michael Chernoff, the same guy after 9/11 that flew all of the bin Ladens out of the country when nobody could fly. The same Michael Chernoff who had shipped all of the steel from the Twin Towers to China. That same guy goes to work for Covington and Burling. Assistant Attorney General Lanny Brewer and a host of Justice Department lawyers involved with Eric Holder's Fast and Furious scandal would find their home there too. He kept having to step back and take a deep breath with what he was discovering. It was fast becoming not only a story almost too bizarre to believe, but tragic and outrageous to tolerate, because American sons and daughters were still dying on the battlefield from terrorist financing. That was still going on. Sadly, it seemed that the political military intelligence agency bureaucrats wanted none of the information that would solve the problem. Dov Zakim suddenly appeared as a common denominator in all of his experiences and subplots. He was at the center of the spider web, to whom all things were connected. Before joining Booz Allen Hamilton's, Zakim was a member of the Council of Foreign Relations and the Heritage Foundation. Bennett also had worked at the Heritage Foundation. Zakim served as a foreign policy advisor to George Bush, a part of the group that was led by Condoleezza Rice and called themselves the Balkans. Bennett had also worked at the Bush administration before he was asked to join this counterterrorism. Zakim was part of the project for the New American Century, PNAC, which we've seen in the middle of a lot of nefarious things throughout our journey here. It basically is a neocon think tank. The Project for New American Century was an American think tank in Washington, D.C. that was established in 1997 as a nonprofit by William Crystal and Robert Kagan. And William Crystal was tied to the CIA. The PNAC stated goal is to promote American global leadership. Just let that sink in for a second. Um, Others might say their agenda is to promote American global domination through military interventionism, economic development or destruction as they see fit, and psychological operations. That's a much better description of what they do. Quote, American needs another Pearl Harbor to energize the American people into a military plan against the Middle East. That was written by PNAC. Part one of the PSYOPs was cultivating in people's mind the danger of another Pearl Harbor. Part two was creating that Pearl Harbor, which was 9/11. And part three was mobilizing the military intelligence police state to embark on endless wars to achieve this nefarious thing of basically the destruction of the Middle East. And they certainly succeeded for a very long time in doing that. In 2001, Zav Zakim became the Undersecretary for Defense in Bush Jr.'s administration. And the Pentagon, and this is during the time, of course, with the legendary $2 trillion missing, and then the object, which was not an aircraft, that hit the Pentagon. And it just so happens to hit the Pentagon in the place where the people were that had that were supposedly investigating where the $2 trillion went. Okay. He puts a link into the videos to watch the unbelievable non-aircraft hitting the Pentagon. Interestingly, before the Bush administration, Zav Zakim had been the CEO of SPC International, which was a subsidiary of Systems Planning Corporation, a high technology analytical firm that did what? Just this little thing called remote control technology to take over planes. Zav Hakim worked at Systems Planning Corporation, perfecting the remote control of aircraft. After the Iraq invasion, Zav Zakim was appointed by President Bush as a member of the Commission on Wartime Contracting in Iraq and Afghanistan. And what have we learned in our book on private military contracting? That it exploded after 9/11, like literally exploded. Money printed everywhere. And soon after, on May 5th, 2004, to be exact, he's still talking about Zav Zakim, joined the defense and intelligence contracting firm Booz Allen Hamilton, which was one of the major beneficiaries of this massive outsourcing of our military industrial complex. Other Booz Allen men included SecDef and CIA Director Leon Panetta, who was hired around that time, CIA and NSA Director Michael Hayden, and Mike McConnell, who had served as the DNI. That's a lot of heavy hitters at one defense contractor. Mike McConnell was a former Navy admiral and had served as the director of NSA from 1992 to 96, which would be for Bill Clinton. He also served as the U.S. DNI from 2007 to 2009, which would be George Bush, because he left right after Obama came into office. In this role, he was the center of the spider web and knew everything every U.S. and ally intelligence and military agency knew. He is currently the vice chairman when this book was written of Booz Allen Hamilton, knowing everything. Their primary focus was intelligence and national security. He oversaw Edward Snowden's Hawaii assignment to the NSA. The journalist Glenn Greenwald described McConnell as the perfect embodiment of the revolving door syndrome in Washington. McConnell and Michael Chernoff authored an article establishing the partnership between Covington and Burling, which represented UBS and HSBC, and Booz Allen Hamilton in counterterrorism and illicit trafficking operations. Since Booz Allen Hamilton was contracted by the government to find terrorist money, and Covington and Burlington was contracted by UBS and HSBC to hide terrorist contracting, that's crazy. What a small circle. So all of the intelligence elite knows that they are funding the terrorism. They all know it. They know exactly how it's being done because they're doing it. And they make sure that they're at the top of the Booz Allen Hamilton that are going to be getting hundreds of millions of dollars under the guise of stopping the terrorist financing, giving contracts to do specifically that. And they work with Covington and Burling, who are hired by the banks doing the money laundering so that they stay in complete control of not only the money laundering, but the efforts to hide the money laundering. And this guy, Bennett, was in the middle of that shit show and accidentally stumbled on to their network. And they crushed him, just like Birkenfeld crushed him. The missing piece that completed the picture was that Dov Zakim was the man who hired me to leave Washington, D.C. and come down to U.S. Central Command at MacDill to work as a terrorist threat analyst for Booz Allen Hamilton. No doubt so they could control him and set him up, which is exactly what happened. In that position, I tracked and analyzed money supply to terrorists fighting for Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, and the Haqqani network, and now the Islamic State in Syria and ISIS. Strangely enough, he was also the man who fired me from Booz Allen after I began asking questions, writing reports, and requesting information, and generally getting too close for comfort. To all of the terrorist financing underpinnings, the international banks facilitating it, and the intelligence agencies' cover-ups. Soon after my arrest and prosecution, he retired as a senior vice president of Booz Allen Hamilton. Evidently, his job was done. In October 2011, he, along with his son Roger, was mentioned as advisors on the Middle East for Republican presidential contender Mitt Romney, who, strangely enough, also had secret Swiss bank accounts. Another piece of the puzzle suddenly fell into place about why Republican National Committee Chairman Reince Priebus and Mitt Romney presidential team never acknowledged or acted on any of his reports. Dov Zakim and Roger Zakim and others had written checks to make Mitt Romney their man. More information began to seep out, and the looming avalanche began to crack and shift. NBC news anchor Brian Williams interviewed Snowden in Russia, in which Snowden disclosed his connections to Brad Birkenfeld's CIA targeting operation in Geneva, Switzerland, as well as his frustration and disgust. This is a quote. I've been in the intelligence community for a decade. What's more shocking is not the dirtiness of the business, but the dirtiness of the targeting, the lack of respect for the public, the lack of respect for the intrusiveness of the procedures. I lived and worked undercover overseas, was assigned a name that was not mine. I worked for the CIA, also the NSA. I was a DIA lecturer. So when they say I don't know what I'm talking about, they don't know what they're talking about. Snowden is discussing the entrapment of the CIA that the CIA employed to extort Brad Birkenfeld into becoming a CIA asset and committing industrial espionage against UBS and Switzerland. This information Birkenfeld released to Bennett, this guy, and is discoverable on State Department servers as well as CIA station chief cables, that some of which were released by WikiLeaks. The NBC News timeline of Snowden also corroborates this. From 2007 to 2009, Snowden is posted in Geneva, Switzerland, under diplomatic cover as an IT cybersecurity expert for the CIA. I've said the entire time that knowing what Snowden knew, he had to have been working for the CIA, not the NSA, and not really a contractor. That was all a cover story. A position that gives him access to a wide array of classified documents. He later tells The Guardian that during this period, he became disillusioned about how his government functioned and what the impact was on the world. I realized that I was part of something that was doing far more harm than good. Late in 2009 to 2012, Snowden's supervisor at the CIA placed a critical assessment on his behavior and work habits in his personnel file. He also voiced suspicion that he had tried to break into classified computer files to which he was not authorized. The New York Times reports after he was identified as the leaker, quoting two unnamed senior American officials, Snowden leaves the CIA soon after his supervisor's criticism and begins to work as an NSA contractor assigned by Dell. He was one of over 800,000 contractors with top secret clearance working for the federal government. Over the next several years, he switches between assignments with the NSA and the CIA for Dell. Dell is being used as a front, as we found all of these defense contractors doing. That included a tour at the NSA facility in Japan that lasted until March of 2012. So we're going to stop right there. We'll finish up this section tomorrow because that's a lot to digest. Not for us, because this is just par for the course. It's just another person caught up in the web.
I'm going to use Stellar's expression, just more fuckery, okay? Just a lot more fuckery going on. The same people.
Same people. Same people, different targets, same people, same crap, doing the same thing.
All part of the playbook.
SR, go ahead.
Thank you, Colonel, and thank everyone for being here on Spaces and on Rumble. And please do hit the like. The Colonel needs all the exposure she can get in this, and now that we're getting the names that we know for a fact many of us have lived through. I mean, there was a whole list of names there. That's practically the whole damn administration just named.
Yep.
But given all of this and given Snowden and what's going on here, Snowden was actually hired to do the job he revealed the information about. That was his job description. So I agree with you that, yes, he did work for CIA. He did work for NSA. He was involved in this. And when he saw what was going on, I hate to say it, but this man is one of the few that said, I had enough.
That is a fact.
Thank you, Colonel.
Sure. If you guys want to come up and say anything, please do that. I have a 5:30. I'm going to go on Scott Zimmerman's show for a few minutes. So we'll be having a much shorter question and answer period here today.
Well, Colonel, I got to jump in then.
Okay.
Because I got a bunch on this.
Okay.
Hey, everyone. There's about 4 different things here that circle back to some of the stuff we've talked about, but I wanted to give a little bit more detail on the Lanny Brewer in Covington real quick.
Okay.
We've talked about this before.
Yep.
Lanny Brewer, of course, was the central focal point of Operation Fast and Furious. And he knew about this because of something that happened before called Operation Wide Receiver. But he specifically didn't escalate the concerns, and he later admits his mistakes and gives testimony. So he's all over that. Grassley actually demanded his resignation, but that never happened.
Yeah, he didn't make any mistakes. That was all planned, but go ahead.
Well, there were air quotes going when I said mistakes.
Okay.
In fact, the air quotes are actually in my notes on him. He's also the guy that we talked earlier about how they, when Obama, if you go back to the 2008 election, Obama was losing by 5 points on the weekend that Lehman Brothers goes down. He wakes up the following Monday, he's up 5 points. And what I've always said, instead of going on the campaign trail that weekend, what Obama did was spent the weekend on Wall Street in New York City. And he got a 10-point swing on the polls over a weekend. So what happened? Well, they cut a deal with the Wall Street bankers. Lanny Brewer is the guy that ran point, said, look, no banker's ever going to go to jail. Any fines will be, quote unquote, reasonable. And, well, by the way, these money's going to go to these NGO slush funds that the Obama administration will pick. And that's what's been financing these NGOs to this day. That's been coming out of Wall Street. That's Lanny Brewer. He's the guy that negotiated that deal. He was in New York City that weekend with Obama.
And that's the one that they put Elizabeth Warren in charge of.
That was the next
iteration up and okay.
Yeah. Brewer's got so much dirt around him, it's ridiculous. But we've talked about Covington and Burling before, and
a lot.
Yeah. Let me just grab a real quick note. So the alumni we went through, obviously William Bundy from Skull and Bones, Victoria Newland, who we talked about, the Merchant of Death, because her husband is Skull and Bones, Robert Kagan. You had White House counsel for Obama, Dana Remus, John Bolton, Eric Holder, Lanny Brewer. But the part that I want to hammer home again is since 2008, Covington and Burling has had basically they've been brother-sister with a Qatar-based transnational law firm by the name of, I can't pronounce this, Koresh for Law and Policy. The Qatar has been in bed since 2008 with Covington and Burling. And I just want to leave that hanging out there because that's a big freaking deal.
It is.
There's some other guys you talked about today that I could go into, but since you're short on time, I'll let some of the other people speak. But I had a hammer.
Nobody else. No, go ahead. Nobody else has their hand up. Go ahead.
Well, Dean Acheson, David Acheson's father, was Covington and Burling. We've been all over that. There's just a lot to it today. I'll speak up again when I hit on another topic, but that's a lot out there, right? That's a lot of dirt in one little corner of today's talk.
Yeah. Brewer actually, I want to read this, his early life. He's from Columbia Law School, sorry. It says, Brewer's parents were both Holocaust refugees. His father was from Austria. His mother was from Germany. And his mother's parents were both murdered in the Holocaust. it says that he graduated from Columbia Law School and became the assistant DA in Manhattan from 85 to 89, which is a very interesting time frame. And that's during Cuomo's tenure there, if I'm not mistaken. He joined Covington and Burling in 1989. He was in Clinton's White House counsel office, which is very interesting at the time of the whole Lewinsky garbage going on. He also was involved, let's see, it mentions he was involved during a private practice period. Let's see. Oh, when he was at Covington and Burling during the Enron collapse, the Halliburton KBR hearings in the House Oversight Committee. It says he made headlines when former colleague from the White House, Sandy Berger, was asked for representation after the investigation of him sticking classified documents in his pants. He became Assistant Attorney General under Obama for the criminal division, which is very, very important. Of course, he was confirmed 88-0 because he's in the club. Also, it says that he was found culpable in some of the policies during the Clinton administration because he was in the White House counsel office at the end of his term when Clinton signed the documentation to change the financing and make all of those subprime mortgages. So he was later identified as culpable for the 2008 financial crisis. This is obviously hilarious. To Warhamster's point, it says in 2012, under Brewer's leadership, the fraud section resolved an investigation. Resolved, not prosecuted, resolved. And that's what Warhamster just said. They made an agreement that they weren't going to hold anybody accountable for money laundering. Resolved an investigation of Barclays Bank into banks' manipulation of the LIBOR rate. So they had to pay $160 million and then basically just continue to do whatever it is that they're doing. But they got their money that they can now launder through their special little fund. In 2012, Brewer announced HSBC agreed to a fine of $1.25 billion. It was the largest one in history. Again, that had to do, it says, HSBC would not be criminally prosecuted for alleged terror financing. So HSBC was financing terrorism, but no one ever went to jail for it. And this is directly related to this book in 2012. They just pay their get out of jail free fine and go on doing whatever it is that they're doing. Let's see. Oh gosh, he was involved in the BP oil spill too.
The Bank of International Settlements was deeply involved with getting the international banks off the hook after the great financial crisis. One of the very first public presentations I did, going back about 4 or 5 years, it's on my channel, it's like probably on the very oldest page, was talking about the BIS. And I go into a little bit more detail on that. And it's been a while, so my memory's not good enough to pull it up. But yeah, the BIS was using a lot of their sovereign immunity to shield those banks.
Interesting. Yeah, here's where it says in 2011, Chuck Grassley called for his resignation due to his involvement in Fast and Furious. Let's see. Um, and then, of course, it says that he left and went back to uh, Covington and Burling. So always got a place for these nefarious guys that just circulate through the Washington, D.C. swamp. But anyway, okay. And he wasn't just anybody. He was like the vice chair of Covington and Burling. He was a bigwig. So Covington and Burling is like the Sullivan and Cromwell of Washington, D.C. In case there was any doubts, I'll just go ahead and throw that out there. All right, SR, go ahead.
Thank you, Colonel. I did want to mention that Birkenfeld, even though he served time, they turned around and rewarded him with $104 million because of his whistleblowing.
That's his shut up money.
The other thing,
yeah, that was his shut up money.
Exactly. And the other thing I would say is, as I recall, during the whole time this was going on, there were ads all over TV about, if you buy drugs, you're financing terrorism.
Yeah.
Well, the banks were doing all of this stuff. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah. Yeah. You may be financing with your $30 bag of whatever it is that you're buying. But that's only thanks to the CIA providing it or giving it safe passage into the country so they can maximize their benefit on the back end. And these banks were money laundering for them for that exact reason. So, yeah.
And the whole deal with the LIBOR was pretty hush-hush. It entered the news and was gone in about a week.
Well, they just staged something else to happen, like kidnapping somebody's mom, so nobody pays attention.
That never happens.
Yeah.
You want me to give everyone a little bit of insight of how UBS worked at the time Burkholder was there?
Sure, go ahead.
So we talked when the Colonel and I did a full show on UBS. I talked about this a little bit, but I worked at UBS from about 1999 to 2004 as a financial advisor, wealth manager. That's the same job that Burkholder had on the other side of the ocean, and our jobs could not have been any more different. We were about as vanilla. Payne Weber was bought by UBS in 99, right when I got there. They did that because Payne Weber had one of the cleanest reputations on Wall Street, and that's like being the cleanest pig in the sty, but it's still a good thing to have.
What a great analogy.
But it is. Since I've been talking about pigs so much lately. So my job is basically to take high net worth clients and invest their money in very safe long-term assets and just do purely by the book financial planning. Burkholder's doing the opposite. He's taking even higher net worth people money and trying to avoid taxes in any way, shape, or possible. 90% of what he does is tax avoidance. One of the reasons UBS bought Payne Weber was to get that squeaky clean image so they could have access to all the Wall Street markets, and it worked. When Burkholder starts coming over to America, he would travel without a computer. They didn't like online banking. The whole rest of the world's going digital. They do the opposite. They wanted to leave no evidence trail behind. And it really was just a totally different world. And it's the same darn company. And the guy would have been barely my senior, very equal positions. But if there was a big international client came on, they would have been fed to him and absolutely not me. So that's a little bit of flavor for how that worked.
That's interesting. Because when you said that, do you know what my brain immediately flashed back when you said they didn't like using computers?
Go ahead.
BCCI. They didn't use any computers.
Well, exactly. It leaves a trail of evidence.
Yes.
They memorized passcodes. This is Swiss banking secrecy 101. The rest of the company is entering the digital age. And since I'm the youngest guy in the office, I got to teach all the old guys how to use an email. While the rest of the company, they're trying to really push technology, while the parent company is doing just the opposite at their core business.
So would anybody find it Weird that this Zakim guy, the Dob Zakim at the center of his Venn diagram. Remember the company that I mentioned, the Systems Planning Corporation, that he was the CEO of their parent company? Do you know who was their largest support contract? They had the largest support contract for DARPA. DARPA, the people that does all of the shit for the military and the CIA that none of us is allowed to know about. That DARPA. They were DARPA's largest support contractor. The guy that is in, he's the Forrest Gump of this guy's story. Largest support contractor for DARPA. Holy shit.
Well, there's always a Forrest Gump in our stories, aren't there?
Yes. Yes. My story has quite a few of them. But I do have like my top 5. Oh my God.
My first Forrest Gump was Shackley. I mean, that's when I started reading everything where Shackley was. I said, okay, we got a pattern.
Yeah. I think my first one that I actually adopted was William Pauly. And then, of course, I stumbled across Lyman Lemonsker. And then I stumbled across Felix Rodriguez. So I definitely have my favorites. All of them evil villains. But, and I mean, John McCloy was like everywhere. So, yeah. Anyway. All right.
All I can say, Colonel, if I may.
Sure.
You know you're in deep shit when you go to every person in the administration you can think of, every news outlet, any way you can to get this information out, and nobody touches it.
Yeah.
And when you stop and think about it for a minute, you have to wonder and you have to really open your mind and say, who stops all this shit? How do they have that much control? Because we know why they stop it. But I mean, this guy literally went everywhere he could to get information out.
Yep.
And it wouldn't go.
Yep.
Well, SR, it's like the question I asked in the Rumble chat. You look at Barack Obama, who's like a freshman senator from Illinois with no experience whatsoever, and he's on the Foreign Relations Committee in a position to be the gatekeeper. Now, what experience does he possibly have to get that position? And obviously it's because he's a member of the club, and they know they can trust him to, basically be a roadblock. And there's 1,000 Obamas in every department, throughout the entire government. That's the definition of the deep state.
That is true. Yeah, it says their specific expertise, to hit the book's point about the remote control. Their primary specialty at Systems Planning Corporation was flight control systems, which verifies what he said. They also were involved in stealth technology. Yeah. So crazy world.
I got another fun little tidbit for you.
Okay.
I think I told you the story about when UBS bought Payne Weber.
Yeah.
They were sitting in a room with like 10 very well, nicely dressed Swiss bankers on one end of the table. And on the other end is a guy by the name of Joe Grano Jr., who was the CEO of Payne Weber. Grano was a New York street kid and a Army vet, and he basically out-negotiated these UBS bankers. But you look a little deeper into Grano and his military experience, and he was Special Forces in Vietnam. And there is not a whole lot of information about Grano's military experience available at all. I couldn't find diddly squat, but He's at least adjacent to some stuff we knew was going on.
He's adjacent to the CIA.
I can't say he was dirty in any way, shape, or form. I've got nothing bad. I've never heard anyone say anything bad about the guy. And I know people that knew him, but it's just a funny coincidence given all that we know.
Well, you can say he was adjacent to it because the CIA ran that entire thing. The military was there for filler, for dead bodies. The CIA was firmly in control of what was going on in Vietnam, both in South Vietnam, in Laos, and in Cambodia, period.
Yeah, and we know about the military transports to the drugs and all that, but Brown was one of those guys leading the special forces units in the jungle. So,
which was under the operational control of the CIA.
Sure. That's why the word adjacent. I think the word adjacent is
yes, it's perfect. Yes, it's perfect. All right, I'm going to jump off of here so I can go get my drink refilled. Thank you guys for being here. We're going to move on through this material. I find it fascinating. It's a perfect time to be talking about this as all of the crap that's going on with the banks right now. And like I said yesterday, with what Colombia came here and said, that it's the banks that are behind the money laundering for the drugs and all that other stuff. It's just perfectly timed to talk about this so that people can see patterns, because that's what allows us to kind of get through the fog that is always put out in front of all of these exposures. And they can't do that to us because we have pattern recognition from examples in the past when this stuff happened. So we're well armed to be the voice of sanity throughout the next several months. That's going to be barn buster as far as I'm concerned. All right. Thanks, everybody, for being here. I wanted to say one thing. Hold on. In response to our request to help out with the funding of our video, I'm not going to say your last name because I don't want to break any privacy thing, but Mary, Doris, and Christy have been very generous in providing us with donations for the production of the video. And I just wanted to give them a shout out and a thank you for their help. I know others have done that. This came in via the donations on X. And so I just wanted to give them a quick shout out. Anyway, thank you all very much for being here and all the support you guys offer. I appreciate it. So you guys have a nice evening. And I'll be back tomorrow. What? Did you want to say something more, Hamster? Nope. All right. Oh, he just took his mic down. Okay. So thanks, everybody. Take care. See you guys. Thank you for being here. Oh, and don't forget to give us a thumbs up. It helps.